views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of WTJX, its board, staff, or underwriters.
Good day and welcome to Ability Radio. My name is Kishma B. Francis. I am one of your hosts. Ability Radio is brought to you by the Disability Rights Center of the Virgin Islands. And today we will be talking about ADA month. And we would like to welcome Shammi Carr. Shammi, if you could just tell the listening audience a little bit about yourself, even though they might be familiar, and just start off with the history of ADA.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Good day. And thank you, Kishma. My name is Shammi Carr. I'm an advocate at the Disability Rights Center. And I've actually been an advocate for over 25 years, working for people with disabilities. And in 2002, I had an opportunity to work at the Americans with Disabilities Act Technical Assistance Center at Cornell University. And that's really when I started to gain my experience and learning of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So in terms of, let me just mention them because they're actually an affiliate of ours, which is a Northeast ADA Center. When the ADA passed, I'm going to talk about that in a couple of minutes, these centers were set up to be able to provide information, kind of the responsibility, and also the resources that were put out by Department of Justice and also the IRS to help what they call covered entities or entities that had responsibilities to come into compliance. And these tech centers were put in place up until 1992. But now it's, we're in 2024 and they're still in existence. So still doing the same thing. I worked at one of them. And again, I'll talk about it in the context of the ADA. So in terms of a little history, kind of what we call the little preamble, there's so much to the history. You've got the history of the cultural aspect of disability. You've even got the religious aspect. You certainly have the kind of the community or the social aspect. And one of the things I wanted to just kind of give a very brief overview, because there's so much to this. I mean, I think generally people know that people with disabilities were always excluded from the community and from society. There were very terrible things and atrocities that's happened. And so I think everybody knows that. I want to bring up a few things that people may not know as much or know as specifically. When people were leaving the institutions and starting to really be able to kind of be accepted into society, or at least the notion of that, there was what was called these ugly laws. And I really want to point these out because, Europe had them, America had them. And when people were starting with the industrial age and trying to, get a footing for their own livelihood, now these laws were put in place to deter and distract and even delete people with disabilities who were greatly affected by these. I just found that to be a very interesting law. I never really knew they existed until about 5 years ago. And in the context of disability history, it makes a lot of sense why people with disabilities not only were not allowed to work when other people were working, there were even disincentives that were related to the history of the people with disabilities. So what happened now that we get into in terms of talking about shifting some paradigms, we really have to thank the veterans. They're the ones who really put in the fold that disability can be part of society again. And back in the Civil War, there were many amputees. And that's when the folding of disability coming in back into our society. And then the veterans, of course, with the world wars, and then in the 1920s, were able then to not only start a movement about being rehabbed to come back into society, but they actually helped start the whole division, which we still work under today, which is the Rehabilitation Service Administration, the RSA, was created in 1920. And so the veterans pushed that. They pushed for vocational rehab. And to this day, we must thank them over 100 years ago for allowing that integration of people with disabilities to be able to have a livelihood here in America. Getting a little bit closer to time, the Civil Rights Movement of 1964, it actually did not include the protected classes of people with disabilities. Many times people think they were protected, but they are not. It wasn't until the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and many people know about this provision called Section 504. And Section 504 was for any entities that receive federal funding. Most of them were municipalities and local governments. And again, if any other organizations did receive federal funding, they now had an obligation. And then we get to the ADA. All these were kind of precursors to the ADA. And in 1990, and there was a lot of hemming and hawing. There was a lot of it due to the transportation part of the ADA that delayed it so much. But in 1990, it was passed on July 26th, and that's why we're doing the show to celebrate, excuse me, and bring awareness. And it is very closely related to the Rehab Act, meaning they use the same definition. Also, I mentioned these ADA centers. Congress had set it up so that in 1990 to 1992, these centers would be set up. There's 10 regional centers, and every state and territory had assignment or a catchment area. And many a times the information that it was just taking so long because a lot of people didn't, again, covered entities didn't understand, well, what does it mean to be accessible? What does it mean to be physically or programmatically accessible? And then what was really getting botched up was people with disabilities couldn't even, or was having a hard time filing for discrimination because the definition of disability was being so litigated that in 2008, ADA was amended again. That's the ADA Amendments Act of 2008. And it really brought back the congressional intent of the definition of disability. And so here we are in 2024, looking to celebrate ADA for 34 years. And I'll leave it with that with the history.
Nice. And when it comes to ADA, I know we keep using the acronym, but just go ahead and spell it out for them, for the listening audience. What's ADA?
Yep. So ADA stands for the Americans with Disabilities Act. And excuse me, I have to just make a little joke that when I worked at the ADA Center, sometimes people thought we were the American Dental Association. So thank you for the clarification.
Oh, gosh. So now we're at the 34th anniversary of ADA. What's the theme for this year?
So the theme for this year has actually been the same theme since the 30th anniversary of the ADA. And a lot of times what people are doing now is really just thanking the ADA. They're doing all sorts of different um, ways to be able to celebrate and bring awareness. So for example, and when we end, I'll be happy to give the information about where they can find that information. They have toolkits and everything. But it's a lot of testimonies and it's a lot of different ways to do that. And so again, it's just pretty much reiterating the ADA anniversary of the 30th anniversary. And again, it's celebrate, it's learn, it's share. That was last year's theme. I'm sorry, this year's theme, and it just continues to build upon the 30th anniversary. We may see a little bit of shift on the 35th anniversary or the 40th when they start to look at what's been done, what's needed, and what are the new kind of social and public policy needs.
Awesome. Awesome. So, what changes have you seen when it comes to the ADA over the last 5 years? Let's go back. Just think about 5 years. ADA, you've been involved in the advocacy. You've been involved in not only preparing for the events in July, which you do a really good job at. What have you seen? What changes have you seen?
Well, and I think this really goes to the people of the Virgin Islands. I'll speak first a little bit more nationally, then I'm going to bring it down to us here locally. In the last 5 years, particularly due to, I think the biggest change we've seen is related to employment. With COVID and the pandemic, people really pushed the envelope and out of necessity to be able to work at home or have a hybrid setting. Now, in 2003, there was an EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission guidance having to do with telework as a form of reasonable accommodation. So we've been advocating for this for, at the time, over 15, 17 years when COVID hit. And so now there is no issue of working at home or telework or hybrid. It's really become ubiquitous in the world of work now where we can clearly see at least 30, 40% of the workforce now in virtual space. So I would say that's one thing that's changed. Also related to employment, I think we're finding that people with disabilities are, are struggling, but still getting some sort of hold on the different employment supports. That's something that a lot of people kind of, even though it's the first title of the ADA employment and it was made the first title because people with disabilities were just fed up with discrimination. And, there's a lot of initiatives that come out of U.S. Department of Labor, that comes out of also Social Security and the IRS too, that helps employers and businesses to become more accessible. So I think, people are starting to continue to get a better handle, but I certainly think we have a long way to go. And some of the things that are happening here more locally, I would say, really goes back to some of the folks who've been working here historically. And I think this is a good time to give them a little props in terms of change, because these are system advocates. These are people who have worked not in silos, but in partnership to make this happen for the territory. And I just want to, again, give some highlights to these folks. And I apologize if I've left anybody out, but when we talk about what changes has happened, especially not just the last 5 years, but even the last 20 years, here in the Virgin Islands, things are a heck of a lot more accessible, but things certainly need to be a lot more accessible. We've come a long ways, but we have a long ways to go. We see that, discrimination in the workplace is a lower rate than we see nationally. And that could be related to a lot of things, being that the VI, being part of the Caribbean, being part of different cultures, have different ways to talk about disability and address disability. So I think that's kind of a feather in the cap of the Virgin Islands, because again, we work with, people who deal with employment discrimination, and we do see it being less than the national. When we talk about communication, we've seen hospitals, ramp up their communications for those who are deaf, hard of hearing. We actually worked with someone who worked at the hospital who, again, stepped it up when it came to effective communication, not just for her, but for patients. When we talk about the schools, again, we have a long ways to go, but there are better supports for special education. There's a little bit more assistive technologies. They're looking at transition of high school students with disabilities having a better post-school outcome. So again, I think locally that we see this, and some of these people were a big part of that. For example, Dr. Haptis, Dr. Yegan Haptis was a big part of that when we talk about inclusion, we talk about special education, we talk about parent advocacy, and he was a big part of that. Mark Van Zandt also was another big disability advocate. God bless him, he passed away recently, but a great advocate. He worked with the Developmental Disability Council. Did a lot of great things along with Adita Karti, another great advocate here. She actually still joins us here and then for different events. So we're always just pleased when she has time to do that, because she has an historical context of that, and being a person with a disability, she has truly seen everything that's happened in the decades here. Want to give a shout out to Felicia Brownlow. She was executive director of the Independent Living Center, and the Independent Living Center, I want to briefly mention them because that's all they do is advocacy, kind of like us, but they became advocates back, excuse me, with a person called Ed Roberts. Now I'll give a little historical context. Ed Roberts was among some other students who helped push the independent living movement, because they were trying to get a college degree and everything was just a barrier. And so when they started the Independent Living Center movement, they basically, in total, and I myself worked at an Independent Living Center in upstate New York, that they started moving so large that now there's an Independent Living Center in every state, every county, in every territory throughout this country. So what they did is amazing, because now all of them advocate at a grassroots level. They know what's going on, just like the Independent Living Center here, VI Association for Independent Living. They know what's going on in the trenches. They're in the trenches. They're there with the people who need the hand holding and who need that extra support when people have just kind of given up at times. And I know people who have transitioned and moved here from other islands or from the States, and the Independent Living Center has been a great resource to get them going in the right direction. And Felicia Brownlow was the leader of that and started that. I want to give a shout out to Yvonne Peterson as well. She was a big advocate, especially for, and she continues to be an advocate for special education and for families with special health care needs of children with that. And Yvonne Peterson, also previous director of the Developmental Disability Council. And I want to give a shout out to us at Disability Rights Center. We had two people historically who has been involved throughout the decades, and that is our previous executive director, Amelia Healy Lamont, who is an attorney as well, but the executive director, and also Archie Jennings, who's an attorney as well. Both of them have been very instrumental, have worked with all of these people to make changes in the last few decades here in the Virgin Islands.
Awesome, awesome. And I know you talked about on the national level briefly. Do you have any ADA heroes on the national level?
Yes, I mentioned one, and I will mention a few more. Ed Roberts again, the one for the Independent Living Center, and then we call the godfather of the ADA is Justin Dart. Now, if you ever look at the picture of the signing of the ADA in the front lawn, you will see that there's an individual in a wheelchair to the left, and then there's an individual in a wheelchair to the right, and the gentleman to the right has a hat on. That's Justin Dart. And Justin Dart, like I mentioned, is the godfather of the ADA. And he's somebody that is obviously well respected because truly, if it wasn't for him and helping with the architecture of the legislation and also the advocacy, because as I mentioned, there was a ton of lobbying against the ADA. And thanks to Justin and his crew, and I say his crew because his crew included folks who uh, did what they call the Capitol Crawl, and that was when people who use all sorts of assistive devices to walk or wheelchairs, they put them aside and they walked up. And so this is the type of action that was taken. And I'm sure some people remember when people with disabilities would chain themselves to the bus and so forth. So this is all of Justin Dart, all of Ed Roberts, independent living, and also systems advocacy. And we can't forget to mention, of course, Judy Human, which she also recently passed away. She's kind of considered the mother of the Rehab Act. She was very, very involved, and there's actually a movie about that and that Obama's production actually did called Crip Camp.
Mm-hmm.
And if anybody really wants to know the history of the ADA, the Rehab Act, and also just these great advocates I'm talking about, that's a great movie. Um, and so Judith Human really pushed the envelope when it came to inclusion, um, education. She was also part of what they called 1975, the education um, for handicapped children. And I don't know if I've got that exactly right,
Mm-hmm.
but we know it's now today as the Individual with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. But
Yeah.
Judith Human was that law would not have passed without her. And so, kudos to her to be so tenacious and to have a crew again to pass the Rehab Act. And the Rehab Act has been amended in 98 as well.
Yeah.
There's other folks that people talk about. We talk about some current people like Christopher Reeve, who was a great, he talk about going from one situation to another situation, from being very athletic to then becoming very disabled. But he did a lot for the disability community. We've got people like Temple Grandin, who is a national spokesperson, and she has a very interesting story that she's a person with a disability with autism who embraced her autism because her family was on a farm, and she used to sit in the cow cow holdings because the sensory felt so good, and she talks about that experience of how her life on a farm, her having a disability, and I actually saw her, I believe, speak at Cornell University and she's spoken there many a times. She's a very well-known, well-respected, not only educator but advocate as well. So those are just some on a national level. I know I'm missing many, many more, but I want to be conscious of our time as well.
Yes, and you talked about the 1975 Education for Handicap Act, and that's a very important act because it actually set the groundwork for IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, in 1998 when it was first created. So kudos for mentioning that, Shammi. You brought it full circle. So
Yes, that,
I know you have a lot of events coming up in July. You plan some amazing events virtually and in person. So let's go ahead and talk about some of those events.
all right, great. And these aren't necessarily in chronological order just because we have so many different things going on and things are still being scheduled. But I want to at least mention kind of the flavor of what we're doing. And again, if this airs after the fact, people will still be able to get some information. They could give us a call at DRCBI and we can follow up, sir. So one of the biggest event that's happening, and it's a full partnership, DRCBI is in partnership with the ADA Territorial Office, is the Emergency Preparedness ADA Expo, and that's going to be in early and mid-July. And that's going to be an emergency preparedness expo where people with disabilities are specifically invited so that if they're not ready for an emergency, they have all the resources, everything from registries, the different digital capacities for the documents. They've got different types of support services that they can work with to be able to have available to them. So there's 30 plus vendors, and this will be an opportunity where they can go ahead and make sure they're fully prepared. And again, people with disabilities are highly encouraged. We'll have the save the date going out, and then the event will happen. Now, we also are adding a piece to that because people have been the increasing numbers people have been coming to this expo. So we're going to add an ADA piece to it, where in the afternoon for 2 hours, people with disabilities and anyone else who would like to get information, including advocates, on different topics. And those topics will include things related to finances, things related to employment, things related to housing. And so this ADA Expo is a very big effort and event because the fact, again, we have multiple, we probably have about 12 different partners working on this. We're also collaborating on some other stuff. For example, the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and I mentioned them regarding the enforcement guidance about telework. We work with them on a regular basis. And so they're going to be partnering with us for ADA, talking about a very specific topic with ADA Title I, which is the first section of the ADA, talking about flexibility policy. We'll be doing a training for people with disabilities and advocates on your rights and responsibilities under the ADA. And let me just briefly mention that we talked a bit about ADA Title I. The ADA is set up in 5 titles. The Title I for employment, Title II for state and local governments, Title III for places of public accommodations, including businesses, Title IV for telecommunications, and then Title V, which is miscellaneous. So we're going to be doing a training for, again, people with disabilities and advocates to talk about rights and responsibilities under the whole ADA, not just Title I. And then we'll be doing what they call the ADA proclamation. The ADA was passed on July 26th. We will do that proclamation. We're planning to on July 26th for the territory. We've invited the governor, so we're hoping that he will make it, and all our advocates, our great advocates in VI, to really be able to celebrate and bring awareness and celebrate a very important day. We've got some groups that we're also excited that we're working with that would like to do some in-house ADA trainings. We're super excited for that. VI Personnel is looking to celebrate the ADA. We've got Vitran who's looking to celebrate the ADA. And we've got another Department of Labor partner who would like to celebrate the ADA with us in the Virgin Islands. So we're very excited that there's so much activities. And the bottom line is we always feel if we can get the word out, do a big highlight in July, and hopefully throughout the year, people remember the message, remember the mantra, remember the resources, and hopefully kind of keep it going throughout the year. So that's what we have on the book so far. But again, if you go to our website, you're going to see all of the events. And again, if they're past, you'll be able to view some of them. If you would like more information, you can follow up with us. And of course, if it's before, you'll be able to go ahead and sign up and register with us.
And where can they go to register?
They certainly should check our website, which is drcvi.org. And then they can call our main phone number, which is 340-772-1200. If people would like to talk to me, they can connect you to me, even though I'm in St. Thomas. So you can call the main number. If you would like to send an email, you can send an email at info@drcvi.org. And also, we'll be advertising throughout the month of the different events as well. So you'll be hearing some on the radio, you'll be seeing some in the newspapers, and you'll be seeing some on social media as well.
Great. Any of these events, will they be recorded?
Some of the events will be recorded. Again, we're still trying to sort that out, which ones. That's why I'm saying if people hear this after the fact, they need to just give us a call and we'll let them know how they'll be able to either access a recording or where to find it, or if we have materials related to it.
Okay, great. And I just wanted to mention that I looked on YouTube and I saw some of your old, your former ADA shows. So if you YouTube. We have YouTube, DRCVI. Go on our YouTube channel. You'll see some of our past shows, past events. Also, we have Shammi. I just wanted to touch base on something because I know you went over the 5 titles under ADA. When it comes to employment, because I know you're an advocate and you're, very versed in that area, do you do a lot of training under the ADA employment?
Definitely, we do a lot of trainings, definitely. And one in two folds, let me put it that way. One fold is that, I myself, representing DRCBI, we certainly do different trainings, both for employers and for people with disability advocates. And it can vary from trainings on, should I disclose my disability or not? What does reasonable accommodation mean? What are my rights? What are my responsibilities? And that goes for both sides, both the employers or job seekers, and also and for the employers as well, because they need to know. And that's a big issue. Let me just on a sidebar mention that disclosing disability can be hard down here. It's a small island. People are afraid of retaliation, and this is common when you have a smaller area, in this case, an island. So, it is a little bit harder for us at times to be able to, we want to encourage people, we want to empower people, we want to give them the information. But at the end of the day, it's ultimately the person with disability to decide if they want to disclose. And that's just not employment. That's pretty much anything related to the ADA. And that's why it's good for sometimes people to give us a call and talk to us, or the advocates in the Living Center, so that we can help you figure out maybe there's other ways to do this. Maybe there's a seamless way to do this. I talk to so many people about particularly mental health and how to be seamless in their approach. Call it self-care. Or we might just say we just need a little EAP, but we're not really disclosing disability. So there's so many ways that we can help people massage that to their benefit so that they get what they need, but also feel comfortable in the decision that they make.
Jamie, before we go, I just want to thank you for your wealth of knowledge as usual. And we just want to say thank you for all your hard work. This show has been brought to you by the Disability Rights Center of the Virgin Islands. If you would like any more information, visit our website, www.drcbi.org. Thank you very much.
The views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of WTJX, its board, staff, or underwriters.